In the latest episode, the tension in Pervaz reached a boiling point as barbarian forces launched a fierce attack on the territory. Determined to defend their land, Ashya and Carlisle stood side by side on the battlefield, fighting in perfect sync, as if they were two bodies driven by a single, unbreakable soul. From the castle window, Fabian Rusco, the renowned painter, watched them in awe. Mesmerized by their unity and strength, he knew at that moment that he was witnessing something extraordinary, a scene that would inspire his greatest masterpiece. On the battlefield, the barbarians fought desperately, barely holding on as they cursed those who had deceived them into this unwinnable battle. Ashya overheard their bitter curses and turned to Carlisle, her eyes sharp with understanding. "It's just as you suspected," she remarked coldly. "This wasn't a battle the Igrams initiated on their own." Carlisle, with a knowing smirk, speculated further. "Their goal was never to win. It seems this conflict was designed purely to sow chaos and distract us." Ashya's resolve hardened instantly. "Then let's ensure they never have the chance to try this again." Raising her weapon with fierce determination, she was ready to end the fight. Carlisle, equally resolute, raised his sword and declared, "Let's show them what the guardians of our borders are made of." His voice carried over the battlefield as he commanded his forces to seal the border and ensure that Pervaz would become the final resting place for these invaders. The barbarians were quickly surrounded, teetering on the brink of annihilation, but they fought with a shocking, almost fanatical zeal, refusing to back down. Carlisle had never encountered warriors so willing to die for a lost cause. His gaze narrowed as he spotted one barbarian murmuring strange prayers in a guttural, foreign tongue. Suddenly, the barbarian forces seemed to grow fiercer, their violent rage intensifying as they hurled themselves toward Carlisle with reckless abandon. But before they could reach him, Ashya, as swift and lethal as ever, cut them down with precision and deadly grace. Carlisle, perplexed by the barbarians' strange words, felt a stir of recognition. Though he had never heard their language before, something about it tugged at his memory. He had heard something eerily similar once before. A few years back, while Carlisle was on a journey, he overheard a group of men cloaked in shadows, whispering to each other in a strange, unintelligible gibberish. Though he dismissed it at the time, the memory of their cryptic murmurs now flooded his mind as he faced the barbarian onslaught. Just as his thoughts drifted, a barbarian lunged at him, weapon poised to strike, but Ashya was quicker, saving him yet again with a swift, deadly blow. "Why are you so distracted all of a sudden?" she demanded, her eyes flashing with both concern and irritation. Carlisle shook off his daze, his brow furrowed. "It's the words, the things these barbarians keep saying, it's bothering me." Ashya's response was cold and practical, as always. "Don't waste your time on that nonsense, we're going to cut them all down anyway." Carlisle glanced at her, and for a fleeting moment, amidst the bloodshed and chaos, he found himself distracted again, not by strange whispers, but by Ashya herself. In the heat of battle, with her strength and grace on full display, she looked stunning. But there was no time for such thoughts. He snapped back to reality, gripping his sword tighter as he charged forward alongside Ashya. Together, they cut through the remaining barbarians with deadly precision, determined to end the conflict. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, the battlefield finally fell silent, signaling Pervaz's hard-won victory. As Carlisle and Ashya stood amidst the fallen enemies, the tension of battle melted away, leaving only the quiet between them. Their gazes locked, filled with a raw intensity neither could ignore. In that charged moment, they gave in to their emotions, leaning toward one another and sharing a fierce, unguarded kiss, forgetting everything else but the connection between them. Meanwhile, far away in the capital, Priest Gabriel was deep in his dark sorcery, chanting ominous words. But suddenly, pain shot through his head, causing him to clutch his temples in agony. His frustration boiled over, and he cursed the barbarians under his breath. Even after all the help he'd given them in the battle, they had failed him. They couldn't even manage to lay a single wound on Carlisle's body, and for that, Gabriel's wrath was palpable. Every time he crossed paths with Carlisle, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. No matter what happened, Carlisle always emerged victorious, untouched, unscathed, and triumphant, when he should be trembling in the face of the divine power Gabriel wielded in service to God. Since Gabriel had dedicated himself as a servant of God, he had toiled relentlessly, determined to steer the empire onto the righteous path. Yet, an invisible wall of power stood in his way, one fortified by status, noble lineage, land ownership, and the harsh reality of discrimination. The capital belonged to those who wielded power, and those without it were swiftly cast aside. Then came the day when Carlisle returned from a victorious battle, parading through the streets in celebration. He tossed candies to eager children, a display meant to win the hearts of the people. In the rush of excitement, one child stumbled and fell, right in front of Carlisle's eyes. But instead of offering a hand or even a glance of concern, Carlin's gaze flickered over the scene indifferently, and he continued his grand celebration. Gabriel's heart sank. That moment, insignificant to Carlane, spoke volumes to him. How could this man, who couldn't be bothered by the fall of a child, be the future emperor? It became painfully clear to Gabriel, Carlin's public persona was a mask, hiding a man who cared little for the people and even less for the values Gabriel cherished. Gabriel's thoughts darkened, and a dangerous resolve began to take root within him. He wished for the power to stop Carlane, to prevent him from sitting on the throne and turning the empire into a kingdom of the arrogant and self-serving. One fateful day, Gabriel found himself browsing through an old bookstore, absent-mindedly scanning the dusty shelves when something caught his eye. A strange book, exuding an eerie aura of mana, seemed to call out to him. His curiosity piqued, Gabriel reached for it, wondering what secrets it held. As he flipped through its pages, he quickly realized this was no ordinary book. It was a forbidden text of black magic enchantments, a dark art even the Empire's most powerful wizards were strictly forbidden to study. For a brief moment, Gabriel hesitated. This was dangerous, blasphemous knowledge, but as the weight of the Empire's future pressed down on him, a different thought entered his mind. If this book, full of dark and forbidden power, had ended up here, of all places, surely it was no accident. Could this be a blessing from God, sent to him in his hour of need? Gabriel knew, deep down, that resorting to such methods was wrong, completely against the teachings he had upheld his entire life. But the situation was dire. The empire was drowning in the filth of arrogance, injustice, and the unchecked power of its elite. How could the divine plan for the empire succeed if he didn't take extreme measures? Gabriel, who had always been a humble and pious priest, began to justify the unthinkable. In his mind, his soul was a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. His actions, though dark and dangerous, were all in service of a higher purpose. Back in the present, Gabriel reflected on how far he had come. He had set out with the purest of intentions, to rebuild the empire according to God's will, and yet, here he was, wielding the power of the devil to achieve it. But to Gabriel, this was simply part of the process. He was deluded, believing that his actions were justified, that it was his sacred duty to give up everything, even his own salvation, to carry out God's will. If that meant using the lives of the barbarians as pawns in his plan, then so be it. To him, they were nothing more than tools, sacrifices necessary to fulfill a divine destiny. Gabriel had created a spiritual link between the barbarians and a magic circle he had drawn. The spell he cast didn't lend them power, instead, it tethered their very lives to the enchantment. This meant that as long as the spell was active, the enemy couldn't kill them. But Gabriel still didn't lose hope. In fact, he reveled in it. He believed that even though the barbarian lands were cursed and forsaken by most, they held limitless potential for those willing to seize it. As he thought about the possibilities, a grin spread across his face. The Pervaz coalition triumphed over the Igrim invaders, utterly destroying their attack force. They burned the enemy's catapults along the border, threw the bodies of their fallen foes back into the cursed lands, and methodically repaired the damage inflicted on Pervaz. The entire process took a grueling month, but finally, the defenders were able to return safely to the castle, weary yet victorious. As the repairs neared completion, Carlane approached Ashya with a suggestion. Since we've won the war, we should celebrate with a victory banquet, he proposed, his tone light but insistent. Ashya raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. A banquet? We've never done anything like that before. We barely had enough to eat and drink, so how can you expect us to host a feast now? Carlane waved off her concerns. That was in the past. Things are different now. I'll cover the expenses from my own funds. Everyone worked so hard, they deserve this. We need to celebrate our victory and lift everyone's spirits. His enthusiasm was infectious, and after a moment of hesitation, Ashya agreed to go along with the idea. When the night of the celebration arrived, the mood was jubilant. The hall was filled with laughter and the clinking of cups as warriors and townsfolk alike boasted about their bravery on the battlefield. As the victory banquet roared on, Ashya turned to Carlane, a rare, soft smile playing on her lips. I'm glad to see everyone in such good spirits, she remarked, her gaze sweeping over the lively hall filled with laughter and celebration. He paused for a moment, then added, I'm pretty satisfied with how the last battle turned out. I thought this invasion might have been a warning from the Empress, but we managed to clear out all the barbarians without major casualties. The Pervaz knights worked together like a well-oiled machine. Despite the outward pride he felt for their success, Carlin's thoughts drifted back to something more personal. His relationship with Ashya had undeniably shifted during the war, becoming less formal, perhaps even closer. Yet, he was still puzzled by one lingering question, the kiss they shared during the heat of battle. Why had it happened? He had been just as involved, but he couldn't help but wonder what had been going through Ashya's mind when they crossed that line. Did she, like him? The thought lingered, unsettling yet oddly intriguing. Suddenly, Ashia's voice snapped him back to reality. Carlisle, she said, her tone straightforward, what would you like in return? He blinked, momentarily thrown off by the question. In return, he echoed. For everything, Ashya clarified. You've helped Pervaz so much. I'll give you anything, as long as it's within my power. Starting next year, we'll be able to collect taxes again, so if you want, I can give you a portion of that. Carlisle quickly raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. I don't need gold or jewelry, he said firmly. What I want isn't something you can repay with coins. He leaned in closer, his voice lowering slightly. You only have to give back what you took away. Money, power, honor, you can offer any of those to me, but there's only one thing left. Carlisle leaned in closer to Ashya, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, I want something only a woman can offer me. With a tone of disbelief, Ashya asked, Are you telling me to order one of the women of Pervaz to spend the night with you? Carlisle chuckled, shaking his head. No need to go that far, he replied, a smirk tugging at his lips. After all, I have my wife standing right in front of me. And we haven't exactly consummated our marriage yet, have we? In truth, Carlisle was playing with her, thinking that teasing Ashya this way might loosen her up and stop her from acting so formal and distant around him. But what he wasn't prepared for was her answer. I understand, Ashya said, her voice steady. Carlisle blinked, startled. He immediately backpedaled, waving his hands as if to dismiss the whole thing. Wait, hold on, obviously, it was just a joke. Do you really think I'm crazy enough to ask something like that? But Ashya, unwavering, continued. I will repay your help, she said with calm determination. Would it be acceptable if we did it tonight? He stared at her, trying to gauge if she was serious, but there was no trace of hesitation in her eyes. She meant it. Seeing her resolve, Carlisle realized he couldn't just laugh it off or push it aside. Ashya wasn't going to back down. Unable to find a way out of the moment, Carlisle finally gave a slight nod. All right, then, he said, his voice quieter than before. As the night deepened, Ashya sat in the warm bath, her mind turning over the decision she had made. But since they were married, she thought it was only right to make an effort. She wouldn't do this half-heartedly. Nina, Ashya called, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. Do you still have the scent bottles Carlisle gifted to me? Nina's eyes lit up with excitement as she nodded. Yes, milady. I'll fetch them immediately, she said, leaving the room in a rush. A short while later, Nina returned with the small, elegant bottles. She carefully applied the fragrance scent to Ashya, the delicate perfume filling the air with a subtle warmth. As Nina was about to leave, giving Ashya space to relax and prepare, Ashya suddenly halted her. Wait, Ashya said, her voice laced with uncharacteristic hesitation. Make me ready like you did last time. For a moment, Nina blinked, her mind processing the request. Then, realization dawned on her, and her eyes widened with surprise. Milady, you're going to Lord Carlin's room tonight, she asked, excitement creeping into her tone. Ashya, her face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and determination, gave a small nod. Nina didn't need further prompting. She quickly left the room, only to return moments later with delicate night clothes. Ashya accepted them quietly, her resolve growing. Would you like anything else, milady? Maybe some makeup? Nina asked with a smile, clearly enthusiastic about helping Ashya prepare for the night. Ashya shook her head. No, she replied firmly. There's no need for makeup at night. Even with everything in place, Ashya still felt uneasy. She wasn't entirely ready for what was about to happen, but she reminded herself of her decision. Carlisle had refused her offer of repayment, but she was the one who insisted. She couldn't back down now, not after pushing so hard. Finally, with her mind set, Ashya stood and dressed. She left the room, heading toward Carlin's chambers. Carlisle sat in his room, deep in thought, trying to make sense of how things had escalated to this point. He wasn't one to take such a gesture seriously, at least, that's what he kept telling himself. But when Ashya entered the room, the fragrant scent he had once gifted her filled the air, catching him off guard. Carlin's breath hitched. He had every intention of turning this down, of not giving in to something he considered vulgar. Yet, as Ashya stood before him, looking more beautiful than ever in the soft glow of the room, the words died in his throat. I've never done anything like this before, she admitted, her voice soft yet firm. Carlisle had planned to tease her, to gently dismiss the situation and send her back to her room. But at that moment, all of his resolve faltered. It's late, Carlisle finally said, his voice quieter than usual. We should stop here. Ashya's expression shifted, surprise and frustration flashing across her face. But I've prepared so much for this, she said, her voice almost pleading. Without hesitation, she removed her robe, revealing the dress she had carefully chosen for the occasion. Unable to hold back any longer, Carlisle stood, his legs moving on their own accord as he walked toward Ashya. He reached out. "Ashya," Carlisle whispered, his voice barely audible. Carlisle gently swirled his fingers through Ashya's hair, a soft and intimate gesture. But just as quickly, he pulled back and, with a mischievous grin, ordered, "Put your robe back on." His eyes gleamed with playful challenge as he continued, "Did you really think I'd fall for you that easily, just because you're dressed up like this?" He expected that would be enough to make Ashya retreat, to make her give up on the night and leave. But to his surprise, Ashya grabbed his arm, her grip firm yet gentle. "What should I do then?" she asked, her voice tinged with determination. Without waiting for an answer, she took his hand and kissed his palm, her lips soft and warm against his skin. Carlin's face flushed with embarrassment, his heartbeat quickening. He wasn't prepared for this. What was Ashya doing? His teasing had always been a way to keep things light between them, but now her earnestness was throwing him completely off balance. Ashya looked directly into his eyes, unwavering. "Just tell me what to do," she said, her tone serious, even pleading. Carlisle pulled his hand back quickly, caught between his own confusion and her unexpected boldness. For a moment, Ashya hesitated. She could sense Carlin's unease and wondered if perhaps he didn't like her efforts. But she had made up her mind. She couldn't afford to back out now, not after everything. Carlisle was at a loss, unsure of how to navigate the situation. Finally, with a hint of desperation, he ordered, "Let's stop this here. End it now." But Ashya wasn't ready to give up. She walked across the room, her steps deliberate, and sat on the edge of his bed. "Wouldn't it be easier if I just lie down like this?" she asked, her voice steady but her eyes searching his for approval. Carlisle felt a surge of frustration. "Are you trying to annoy me?" he snapped, his tone sharper than he intended. Ashya's eyes widened in shock. She had been genuine in her actions, every effort made to repay him sincerely. She couldn't understand why he thought she was playing games. "What's the matter with you?" he asked, noting her strange behavior tonight. Blushing slightly, Ashya hesitated before replying, "I know these types of dresses don't fit me well either." "That's not what I meant," Carlisle quickly corrected her, irritation creeping into his tone. "I meant your attitude." Ashya's gaze dropped, and she swallowed hard. "I assumed you didn't find me appealing," she admitted softly. "That's why I kept trying so hard to impress you." Carlisle opened his mouth to explain, but before he could find the right words, Ashya suddenly pulled him toward the bed, determination lighting her eyes. "I kept telling myself to motivate me before coming here," she said, her voice firm. "If you don't dislike me, then why do you keep pushing me away?" Before Carlisle could respond, Ashya closed the gap between them and kissed him. After what felt like an eternity, Ashya pulled back slightly. "You can do whatever you want with me," she whispered, a mix of vulnerability and determination in her voice. "That's the cheapest price I can pay, and it's the only thing I can honestly offer." Carlin's heart raced, but he needed to clarify. "If you're doing this just because I helped you in the last battle, then we should stop right now," he said firmly. "But if you genuinely want this, we can keep going." Ashya's eyes darted away, uncertainty clouding her features. She hadn't come here to explore her desires, she was merely trying to repay her debt to him. But was it just that? Did she really want him? Seeing her struggle for an answer, Carlisle sighed, his resolve hardening. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "You don't really want to do this with me, so we should just stop." But just as he turned to pull away, Ashya stopped him, her voice rising in urgency. "No, I'm not sure about it, but I want you to embrace me tonight." Carlin's heart skipped a beat.